Danny, we have some new digs for the week. We didn't record last week, and we didn't want to miss this week, but the studio is pre-booked. Someone beat us to it for this week. So we are recorded live.
I was waiting for you to pull out the live from Hollywood.
From Wallace Drive here in beautiful Monroeville, PA. My humble abode. My wife let us take over the living room for the night for the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. How's it going, man? As you can probably hear, I think the mics, they're very directional, but I'm pretty sure they're picking up my dog freaking out right now in the background.
Talbot is not very happy. He doesn't know what's going on.
Talbot is not happy right now. Talbot got his name from Max Talbot. So he's even a hockey fan. He's in the bedroom watching hockey right now as we speak. So we put golf and hockey on to calm our dog down.
And the Breakdowns
and Breakaways podcast. Yes. He's a big fan. He's a big fan of the show. So Danny, every time we sit down to talk about this hockey team, I go from they're in between times, in between episodes. I think they finally figured it out, and then I watch another game and they haven't figured anything out. And this is just the story of this hockey team this year, isn't it? It is just.
I don't know why you would get your hopes up at this point. Shame on you for.
I always get my hopes up.
No,
I'm the eternal optimist.
You are always looking for.
I'm always looking for the positive in life.
The little glimmer of goodness that you're referring to. Look at the opponents that they were going up against. Man, come on.
Yeah, I could sit here and talk about how the Detroit Red Wings are one of the in the playoff hunt too, but they're a 6 or 7 game skid.
Well, they've been terrible in March.
Right.
The other funny thing, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the Wings, interestingly, have been getting their heads bashed in all year, but have maintained a positive share of goals. Yeah. They've been getting great scoring. They've been getting.
And then you have the Capitals, who are
the Capitals,
a negative 30 goal differential.
Yeah, I think it would be the worst goal differential on record of a postseason.
And they're fighting for a playoff spot. It's just this has been a really we'll get into what we're talking about, but this really has been a very strange hockey season. I think just in the NHL in general, it's been a very off the wall. Now all of a sudden you've got the Sabres fighting for a playoff spot. They're resurgent because of Ukko-Pekka Laukkanen. I don't know what is happening. This hockey season is on drugs.
No, it is. I have to say, though, and I've said it before, how sad is it that there's so many bad teams in the Eastern Conference right now fighting
and
for
the Penguins.
I don't even want to call it fighting for the wild card spot because it has not been a fight. How sad is it that the Penguins are still on the bottom tier of those teams right now? Mm-hmm. When I don't need to keep going into it. Let's go.
We're not beating dead horses on this episode. We do that
at least not too many.
Yeah. Let's look forward to next season, at least for the first half of the show, because all signs point to they're going to try to retool, rebuild on the fly, whatever. Hockey catchphrase you want to use. We did the math pre-recording about somewhere in the ballpark of $14 or $15 million in cap space, assuming the cap goes up the $4 million that Gary Bettman said it should. That's not counting RFAs if they offer anybody. So it's going to look a little different. You're not going to have Jeff Carter on the team for sure.
I don't know.
Don't even go there.
I don't know.
Please don't.
What if we had him? He's been a fine fourth liner, Eddie.
Please don't.
He's been a fine fourth liner. Good veteran presence that's so worth having around, even though it hasn't been the past 2 years.
I'm going to go to
Eddie.
a full-time Pirates podcast. This is if they re-sign Jeff Carter, don't come here for hockey talk anymore. It's going to be the Breakdowns and Bunts podcast.
No, I think he'll be gone.
Yeah. So there's going to be some turnover on this roster for sure. But what does the roster look like? I mean, is there anybody in the AHL right now that you think could come in and play? Like, is Sam Poulin finally ready to maybe make that NHL?
We know where your head's at.
Oh man, that's been a week.
That's where my head's been at. The Steelers offseason.
Oh my god, it's been nuts. We'll save that for the Around the 412 boys. But no, I like. What can they do with limited money to make, because they're going to have to get a backup goalie. I don't know if it's Nedeljkovic again or if they bring somebody else in, but they need to get a backup goalie. They need to bring in, some depth scoring. They need to bring in probably another top 6 guy is going to have to come in here and slot in. Can they do it? And if they can, what does it look like? And if they can't, how do they pretend that? Like where do you see them going this year? Because this is one other thing before I let you talk. The free agent pool this year, I don't know if you've looked at free agency, like the upcoming free agency this offseason. It's not that good. There's not a lot out there.
Which free agent is really good, though, of that class?
Jeff Carter?
No. Jake Gensel.
Jake Gensel.
Far and away the best player.
So that class. You jumped the gun on, you stole my thunder, but I know we joked about it, but is that legitimately, do you think that's a legitimate thing?
Well, the more I see him tearing it up in Carolina all on his own, it's starting to look like Crosby might. No, I'm just kidding. But
I thought Jake was a product of Sid.
No, I mean, that's to an extent. That's I was told Steph Curry couldn't shoot kind of thing, but
it's just people who don't watch the game, I think, is really what that comes down to.
Probably.
But anyways, is Jake actually a viable option? Is there other players out there?
I'd say he's a viable option, but I'd also it definitely seems like from what Dubas has said that they weren't necessarily all that interested in being the team to give Gensel his next contract.
Right.
Because it sounds like Dubas went to Gensel's camp prior to the start of the season. Gensel's camp wasn't really entertaining what the Penguins were bringing to the table, and then that was that, per Dubas. Now, if that wasn't actually what happened, who knows? So at least on that front, it seems like they don't want to be the team that gives him that next contract, which, I mean, it's all, you got to weigh the pros and cons of what you're really trying to do. Dubas keeps saying they're going to be competitive as long as Crosby's around, but he's also saying that they've got to think and make the decisions that are best for the future.
Right.
That it's counterintuitive, if you ask me, and is part of the problem that we've seen these blah rosters and supporting casts over the past couple of years, because Ron Hextall, to an extent, tried to do that too. So anyway, specifically regarding would Gensel come back, is that a possibility? I think it's a possibility. I've always thought it was a possibility, but because I know how much he loved being in Pittsburgh, I know how much he loved playing with Crosby, but I also knew that feelings change over time, especially when you're thrust into a new environment that he's currently thriving in. So
very much so.
Who knows if he spends the next couple months tearing it up and goes on a run, or even goes and wins another cup, that might change his feelings.
It's oddly enough, he's doing it as more of a playmaker right now too. That's not to say he won't score
I mean,
goals,
he's been a. I wouldn't say he's a great playmaker, but I'd certainly say it's an underrated skill set.
I was going to say it's more than people give him credit for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, if the Penguins could get him back, obviously that would be
that'd
fantastic,
be great.
And that probably gives them one of the best chances in terms of an offseason move that they could make to be competitive next season. But I feel like as more and more time goes on, the ship has sailed on that for a number of reasons that I just mentioned. You also asked about anybody in the AHL who could be coming up next season and potentially making an impact on the team. I definitely think that Vasily Ponomarev is going to be in the mix. The guy one of the prospects they got as a return for Gensel. I think Poulin is probably going to be in the mix. I spent some time watching his AHL film, and I know he's been banged up at certain points of the year. But he's the kind of guy and excluding the new guys that were brought in, new prospects that were brought in, but I could actually see Poulin's game translating to
you need a handful of those guys.
You have to.
If you look at any Stanley Cup team, if you look at any good roster, they have 2 or 3 guys on the roster, on the team, that don't take up a ton of cap space, but produce over their what their monetary, kind of threshold is. They overproduce for what their money is, and you get those value guys. I mean, even look at the Stanley Cup runs that the Penguins had, the back-to-back runs. I mean, Brian Rust was a young guy at that point in time.
I mean, hell, even forget the big names. Tom Kuhnackel,
yeah,
Scott Wilson.
Exactly. So you always have to have players like that. Chad Ruhwedel would have fell into that back then. So you need guys that can fill out your roster that aren't making a ton of money, that overproduce. And so maybe Sam Poulin is one of those guys. Maybe this is finally the time that he comes up on a low, and would that still be entry level for him, even though he's been in the system for a few years now? Or how's that?
I actually believe he's on the last year of his entry level contract. I believe he's either on the last year or has one more. But he'll obviously be a restricted free agent.
Yeah, so it's going to be
anywhere. But and that's why I've been frustrated about how the past couple weeks have transpired as well, because they're still trotting Jeff Carter out there. I know he's a great career player, very respected veteran. He does not have a future with this team, and I don't care that he's scored more goals than most of the guys who've been in the bottom 6 this year. The goal, when Gensel got hurt, not even when they traded him, but when he got hurt, the writing was on the wall what was going to happen with this team, and they should have started acting accordingly to plan for next season. And they, to this point, with 14 15 games left, whatever it is, they still have yet to indicate that they are planning for next season, because they are under some spell that they think they're going to get into the postseason. But they, as I wrote last week, they have kind of pigeonholed themselves into a point where they got to still play Carter, and they don't have the cap space to call up a Poulin or a Ponomarov right now, even though they should be. I'm
just looking at some of the free agents that are going to be out there. Would you spend big money on a guy like Sam Reinhart?
No. Reinhart is going to get I love Sam Reinhart as a player, but he is going so much further this season than he probably will ever go again. He'll get $8.5-9 million this year. And
Elias Lindholm, would that be somebody as a second? So
the problem is that any of the good guys from this crop, they're going
to get overpaid.
They're going to get overplayed. You don't build teams through free agency. You augment them.
Do you try to do something that what Toronto did this past season, where you try to get a few guys on a 1-2 year deal? I mean, is that an option?
I mean, are there going to be any?
And that's the thing. You got to wait and see how the cards fall, because if there is a guy I think a lot of the deals that Toronto made, with Domi and Bertuzzi in particular, they were later, if I remember correctly, later in the offseason. And I think with Bertuzzi, I know for sure, just listening to the Toronto media, he was more of a, we know the cap is going to go up more than it is, last year it only went up $1 million. So they had a good idea that the cap was going to go up $4 or $5 million. So that wasn't the time to sign a long-term big deal. So you sign 1 year in Toronto with Austin Matthews and Nylander and Mitch Marner and Tavares, hopefully inflate your numbers, and then get a big deal the year after. I don't know that this is the offseason to do that. I don't know if it's going to work that way. But maybe if there's a guy or two that are, after the first week or two, after the first couple waves of signings, maybe someone's out there just looking for a show me deal, and you get lucky. I mean, that's again, unfortunately, the position they've put themselves is you've got to kind of get lucky.
They're going to have to get lucky. They're going to have to take gambles. Even when Dubas took over last offseason, he said it himself that we're going to have to take some chances on depth players, and we're going to have to hit on them.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I don't think he did.
So just by the tenor of the conversation, I kind of know where you're leaning. Do they figure out a way to be competitive next year, or do you think this is another year of mediocre hockey or another step down?
Is the head coach going to be back?
I think we all know the head coach is going to be back.
then they're going to be mediocre, regardless of what they do in the offseason.
I think that's the double-edged sword that is Mike Sullivan. I don't think Mike Sullivan will coach a bad hockey team. I think he's a good enough coach to where he can take a bad hockey team and make them
a bad hockey team right now.
Over the course of 82 games, I think that Mike Sullivan I think his baseline is mediocre. The problem with that is, and we've seen it with the Steelers, baseline of mediocre doesn't ever get you draft picks.
Right.
That's a whole nother argument for a whole nother time, but I just think that I know everyone talks. I know there was a bunch of talk yesterday on Twitter because I can't remember who wrote the article about Sullivan I know someone clipped an excerpt of it. That's how I saw it.
I'm not sure.
But
somebody write a Fire Sullivan article?
I don't know, but it was basically saying Sullivan's going to be back. And everybody talked.
No kidding.
Everybody talked about, well, this is sports that can change in a matter of minutes. You know, like the Steelers had faith in Kenny Pickett, and now look where he is.
Of course. Yeah, I think it was Dan Hopper that tweeted that.
Okay, so
Hopper's my guy.
The difference in that for me is I think Fenway likes Sullivan.
You think?
I think Dubas likes Sullivan.
You think?
And I think that he's coming up on a new contract starting up here that is going to pay him a lot of money. And we keep talking about this. I know you think he can go out and get a job anywhere, but I think that there's a chance he may just kick back and relax for a couple years.
I don't know why he'd do that. Why would he, other than the fact that he could go get paid for nothing? But if that's the case...
Okay, let me ask you a question, Danny.
I'm not Mike Sullivan nor a professional hockey coach. So if you're telling me to put...
Listen, if your current employer said, hey, we're going to fire you, but we have to pay you whatever your salary is right now to just sit on the couch and do nothing because we fired you. Would you jump at the very next job that came your way?
Not necessarily, but if the opportunity pops up to go coach Jack Hughes or Austin Matthews, my tune might change. I see what you're saying.
I'd be taking a break, man. Take a year off.
Okay, so we're spending too much time on this because the reality is that
he'll be back.
It was Fenway's decision to extend him.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
Like, obviously, Hextall signed that extension to him.
So he's going to be back. Let's just...
An FSG thing. Well, hang on.
Let's fast forward.
He's going to be back. No, hang on. I'm going to get my point out. FSG should have to bite the bullet here if that's what they decide they're going to do and not let that money that they still owe him be an influence in that decision.
But we both know that's not how business works.
Yeah.
So fast forward the conversation.
Then let's stop pretending.
Mike Sullivan's going to be the coach next year.
Probably.
Are they a playoff team next season?
No.
I don't think they are either. So
the other thing, I've been saying this for the past couple off seasons too. Crosby's another year older.
Yeah.
Malkin's another year older.
So
Letang's
here's how I'm
going to
wrap this one up. I'm going to pin you in a corner.
All right, here we go.
They're not a playoff team at the deadline next year. Sidney Crosby's contract is up next year. Do they trade Crosby at the deadline next season if they are not a playoff team?
No, because he'll have already signed an extension to finish his career with the Penguins.
You think he will?
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you're right.
I would say I'm like 99.99% confident.
If he's still a point per game guy next season, though, at the deadline and he doesn't have a new deal, can you imagine what a Crosby trade looks like?
I don't know if he will be a point per game guy at the deadline next year. I mean, he's hardly hanging on to that right now. And where is he going to get another Gensel? Like, I think Michael Bunting has brought a nice skill set, but he's got, one goal at 5-on-5 in his handful of games that he's been here?
He gets another Gensel by getting Gensel.
Well, if Gensel's back, that obviously changes the discussion. But if Gensel's coming back, you're not trading Crosby at the deadline.
All right, well, let's switch gears here. Tired of talking about negativity, especially when this weekend we had some amazing hockey in the city of Pittsburgh. And I'm not talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins. PWHL had their Steel City Takeover on Saturday or Sunday afternoon before the Penguins Red Wings game. And I was able to cover that as a photographer for Pittsburgh Hockey Digest. Shout out Alan Saunders, who owns Pittsburgh Hockey Digest. And man, dude, what a phenomenal day for hockey. I hope so much that Pittsburgh eventually gets a women's team here.
I need them to have a team.
Listen, man, I had somebody close to the situation tell me that it didn't sound like it was in the cards right away. But man, I'd love for Pittsburgh to get a franchise. That whole day, there were 8,850 people there, give or take. And I think that the Penguins purposely didn't sell tickets to the upper bowl, because if you think of the logistics of that, if you add another 5,000 or 6,000 people to the 8,000 that were there, on top of having to get all of those people out of the building and then get all of the people in the building for a NHL game, that becomes a pretty hectic situation. It was already a crazy situation, and you could tell the ushers were not thrilled about having to deal with that. But I think there would have been more than 8,800 people there if they would have sold those tickets and made them available, because the lower bowl was packed. I mean, if you saw some of the photos that I took, like there were very few empty seats in the crowd, and it was really cool to see. The other thing that struck me was the diversity of people that were there. The amount of people that, like dads with their daughters, that kind of stuff. The amount of out-of-towners that came in. Like when I was down at ice level, the photo hole I was at, the family sitting next to me were from Toronto, and like they were super fans. It was, just hearing them scream their heads off anytime Toronto did something good. It was Toronto versus Montreal. It was awesome, man. And I got to talk to them about, the reason it was, figure this one out. It was cheaper for that family to come to Pittsburgh to watch a PWHL game, because PWHL Toronto is playing in the smallest arena in the league. There's only 2,500 seats, and they're sold out every night. It's over $200 at time for certain games.
God.
For a ticket to those games. Like I think they said like the average ticket right now is like $160 Canadian for a PWHL Toronto game, because there's only 2,500 seats. They're selling out every game. So it was cheaper for them to get the $60 seats in Pittsburgh and travel down, and then also go to the Penguins. They got tickets for the Penguins Red Wings game while they were in town. And the one kid that was, I think the son that was with them, he's probably like maybe 10 years old, had his Crosby jersey on and never got to see Crosby play live because they're in Toronto and Maple Leafs tickets are $350 a pop. So he's all jacked up to see Sidney Crosby, and they're all wearing, like they had the PWHL jerseys on and everything. Like it was just, everything about it was such a great hockey atmosphere, man. I saw Quebec Nordiques jerseys in the crowd. I saw Mighty Ducks jerseys in the crowd. I saw, PWHL jerseys in the crowd. I saw, like, you name it, I saw it. And it was just, it reminded me of when the World Cup of Hockey had the Canada-Russia game and the North America versus Czech Republic game here. I got a chance to go to that too, and it was the same thing. It was just a celebration of the game of hockey. Now, that was all out off the ice stuff. On the ice, I don't know how many games you've got to watch of this PWHL. Bro, this is good hockey, man. No,
I watched the majority of the Toronto-Montreal game. It's good hockey.
It's physical. It's skilled. One of my favorite plays of the whole game, and it happened right in front of me, was Natalie Spooner had the puck behind the net, and she made this really nice move to like come around and then get on her forehand. And I know I know exactly what she wanted to do, but I think that they're still getting used to there being hitting in the women's game because she made one too many moves and got lit up. And it was such a skilled play by her, but then it was physical too because the defenseman just came and blew her up and knocked her off the puck. And that's the kind of stuff we see in the NHL all the time. And now we're seeing it in the women's game. And I think that you could see that it's brought it to a different intensity level for them. And it was an exciting game. It was a 2-1 win. It was a tight game the whole time. The Montreal goal, did you see that shot?
Mm-hmm. From the goal line? Below the goal line? No,
the Montreal goal. So she's coming down, does a little toe drag, and then just absolute roof.
I thought there was also a roof job from below the goal line.
Yeah, that was the Toronto one, yeah. But takes skill to make the plays that these women are making. Takes a lot of skill. And I know that they're professional hockey players, but I still think there's a little bit of a stigma for a lot of people. And I'm going to include myself in that because I didn't used to watch a lot of women's hockey. I'd watch the Olympics and that was pretty much it. And maybe that just shows my ignorance, but dude, it was great. I mean, it was a blast to be around, and I'm glad I got to cover it. I'm glad I even wrote about it a little bit. Got to share some photos. It was just fun to be there, man. It was, I can't wait to see another one. And, I think honestly, after experiencing it, if they come to Pittsburgh, I think Marissa and I will definitely be season ticket holders. It's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. I need them to have a team here. And seeing Toronto and Montreal play here only reconfirmed that for me because it genuinely was good hockey. Now, I was disappointed that we didn't get to see Marie-Philippe Poulin.
Yeah, that I thought she was playing.
Yeah, I didn't know.
And then the family next to me said, "Well, Marie-Philippe Poulin's not playing today."
I didn't know she wasn't playing. I turned the game on maybe halfway through the first period, and I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, they've done their rotation through the bench, and I know she'd be out there a lot. I haven't seen her, so I was a little disappointed she wasn't playing.
But still, Sarah Nurse is an incredible hockey player. I'd mentioned Natalie Spooner. She's off the charts. You've got the goalie from Montreal. I know they lost, but the goalie from Montreal had a very strong game, and Renee de Bien. I'm probably butchering the French Canadian names, but just a lot of very talented hockey players on the ice and a lot of just fun hockey, man. It was pretty cool. Hopefully, like I said, we get a team in Pittsburgh, or at least they come back to Pittsburgh. I'd like to see them do it on a day when the Penguins aren't playing so that they can have the day to themselves.
Right.
Or maybe have two PWHL games come through or something like that. Because I do think that I think that Pittsburgh would put a lot more people in the building if given the opportunity. Like I said, I know it was 8,800 people, but I really do think if those 200 level tickets were available, I think there would be a lot more people there. It's a lower attendance level than what Detroit had and what Toronto's been getting when they go to Scotiabank Arena. But trust me, it was a raucous crowd. Everybody was excited to be there. And there was a lot of going back and forth between the Toronto fans, the Montreal fans, and that was hilarious.
Yeah, you could tell watching the broadcast that there was an energy and an excitement about the game going on, and you could tell people were invested in it too, because when there were threatening rushes up the ice, you could if I don't want to exaggerate here, but when you're watching a Stanley Cup playoff game, you can feel the gravity of what's happening by the way the crowd is reacting and the noise that they're making. And there was a semblance of that in that PWHL game, and I think that only
and you could feel it in the arena. Trust me.
Oh, I'm sure.
Definitely could feel it in the arena.
I'm sure. So I think that really just goes to show that Pittsburgh needs a damn team.
Yes, we do. And shout out to Toronto. Highlight them for a little bit. 10-game winning streak. That was 4 in a row against Montreal, which are their inherent rivals in everything. But yeah, they after that game, that was their 10th win in a row. I mean, they are, I think they're the force to be reckoned with in the PWHL, I'll be interested to see how the playoffs play out. I love that it doesn't really make a ton of difference right now because there's only 6 teams, but I love that they're using the golden role for the way the draft shakes
drafting.
out. Yeah, I love that. I
don't know how I feel about it.
I love it, man. I think that that's the way that the NHL needs to go. They're doing a lot of outside the box things with the rules because they're able to.
Yeah, I like that for sure.
I like to see them get creative. I think that that's good for the game of hockey as a whole and for their game, for the women's game itself. But yeah, that was just, I know we look at it as like, man, that was good for women's hockey. Dude, being there, it was good for hockey. Like, I don't need to add anything else. Yeah, I don't need to qualify with women's hockey. That was good for the game of hockey on Sunday for Pittsburgh. And I mean, they won. Not that I wasn't won over before, but seeing it live and in person and being at ice level for it, I'm 100% on the bandwagon, man. I am 100% on board with this. And I think it's finally something sustainable too. As opposed to the old the last couple leagues that have been around. I think the PWHL is sustainable for them.
Yeah, we can only hope next year, or at least by the time Pittsburgh gets a team, that they'll actually have names and jerseys. And that was just a little dig. I don't know. It just frustrated me that they rolled everything out and then we're backtracking on that.
Yeah, Sarah Nurse she was on Spit and Chicklets and she talked about that. She brought up a good point. They pretty much threw this together in 6 to 8 months, like when the actual idea of the PWHL had come around to its actual start date. It was about 6 or 8 months. They had thought about putting names to the teams and uniforms and everything, but they didn't want to rush it because they wanted to make sure that they were brands that they could grow. And that makes sense. I get that. I was frustrated too that there was just PWHL Toronto, PWHL Boston, Minnesota.
Although did they not roll out like team names initially though? I swear they rolled out team names.
They never officially did. Something might have been leaked.
Okay.
But so that is something that they're going to do this coming off season. Right. They're going to grow that. They're going to grow the brands. They're going to kind of tie down to the cities and all that. But I understand why they didn't. Another thing that brought up, like, and we can wrap it up because I know we're going long, but she had talked about, so I think it was Bissonnette had asked her, Paul Bissonnette asked if they ever are going to go to visors instead of full cages because, professional athletes, and that's what the NHL does. And she brought up a good point. At the women's level, they've never worn anything other than full cages. And it has changed the way they play because they don't control their sticks as much as the guys do, because they don't have to worry about hitting each other in the face. And so she said that as much as they want to, she wasn't sure that would ever actually be a possibility because that first year or so is going to be a lot of high sticking calls and a lot of people getting their faces mashed up and a lot of people getting stitches and getting some work done because they've never had to worry about that before. So that was just an interesting tidbit into the game and how they think about these things and how that goes. So
yeah, and I think that's, and we can wrap it up because I know we're going super long here, but I think that's part of the intrigue of it as well because it has the women's game has its own little nuances and its own little wrinkles to it that are maybe just because it is new and fresh, but like I find it very interesting. Stuff like that is fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I'm getting text messages from Marissa saying they want to come in the house now. So
okay, should we let them in or should we just
hang here?
Just hang here, talk a little bit longer. Also, make our listeners hate us in the process.
Watch some hockey. For Danny, I'm Eddie. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next week on the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast.